Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with HistoryThroughCards.com. I hope you're all doing very well today. This video I want to share with you the career of Marvin Miller. And this is a really neat card. I just picked it up not too long ago. I was actually looking for something of his during his career, but apparently no cards, no nothing. So I just had to find this instead and add it to my collection. It's from 2005. Marvin Miller passed away in 2012, so it's during his lifetime, just not during his active career with Major League Baseball or the president of the Major League Baseball Players Association, which I believe he founded. There was something prior to that where Bob Feller, believe he was the president of a union prior to him, but I don't think it was very successful, and there was a lot of holes and stuff, and I think it was left up to a lot of other ball players to make concessions, if you will, or attempt to. I don't think they were very successful at all. However, he came out of a real union as opposed to, say, Bob Feller or Robin Roberts or Eddie Yost. And so today I thought I'd kind of go over his career, and this I thought was really cool. I'm actually thinking of writing a book on Marvin Miller next year. I'm still considering. I have a book that I'm trying to finish up right now on the T206, and man, anybody who tells you that writing a book is easy, yeah, right, sure. Anyway, I'll show you the back. It looks like that. Pretty cool, actually. I really don't like to add cards of players after their playing career. I always like to add quote unquote playing days to or active during their careers. And then, fortunately, in this case, he doesn't have anything associated with him during his active years with the Major League Baseball Players Association. So I thought this was really interesting, and he is again a very, I guess, consequential person in baseball, highly influential. And just because somebody's highly influential doesn't mean that it's good. It can roll both ways. I still say that the jury is out whether or not his actions were good for baseball. Obviously, he was a very monumental force for free agency, but along with that came the high salaries as well. And in a previous video, I did talk about the Andy Messerschmidt case. That was a consequence to the Kurt Flood case. Kurt Flood lost his case at the Supreme Court level uh, because I think Arthur Goldberg, his lawyer and a former Supreme Court justice, just thought he could blow by everything, and obviously that wasn't the case. One thing I want to get your take on, if you think that Marvin Miller belongs in the Hall of Fame or not, because he's not a ball player, he's not a baseball executive, and you know, there is something to be said, I think, where a lot of people believe that baseball executives don't actually belong in the Hall of Fame. I kind of disagree with that, actually. Uh, Owners, I think, belong there because they're the ones who built their teams to success for the most part. If they get to, uh, a championship, not just one but multiple. And sometimes it's kind of weird too that you have a guy like Sam Breeden from the Cardinals. He owned the Cardinals from like 1916 to like 1946, and he was responsible for 10 championships or World Series under the Cardinal flag and a multitude of pennants. And so he's not in the Hall of Fame. Yet you have a guy like Tom Yaki who never won anything, but and again he only got to see a few World Series and a few pennants during his lifetime, and he owned the team from like 1933 to 1976. I believe it's 76. And then from what they say that the Yaki Foundation gave the Hall of Fame like a $10,000 check, and boom, you get him in the Hall of Fame. Whether or not that story is correct, I'm not entirely sure. You guys can tell me in the comment section below if you've actually ever heard that story, because I've heard it for a very long time. And I think that's a very curious thing where Yawkey gets in before Jacob Rupert of the Yankees, and there's a few other guys who have a lot more pennants and World Series wins than Yawkey, who have not seen the corridors of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Anyway, let's get on to Marvin Miller here. I think you're going to find this really interesting. So here we go. This is from the St. Louis Jewish Light, May 19th, 1982. Marvin Miller, Major League Baseball's most powerful figure, by Larry Willard. New York. Mrs. Terry Miller of this city's Lower East Side knows her husband like a book. In many ways, she will tell you her husband is the archetypical Jewish man in his mid-60s. He loves to play tennis. He falls asleep at concerts. He is a virtual slave to certain dumb, her word, television shows. Mrs. Miller, however, is a retired clinical psychologist who has spent 40 years with the man many observers tout as the most powerful figure in baseball, Marvin Miller. For some reason, I have more than a little difficulty conjuring up the deeper, patient, and articulate Miller snoozing at the Met, but I find it difficult to picture him dropping everything for Love Boat and Fantasy Island, two of his favorites. But maybe it fits in the world in which a president snacks on jelly beans and congressmen confess their private sins on a daily basis. Miller, after all, is a man who has distinguished himself in the world of labor management disputes for more than 40 years as a champion of the working person, first as chief negotiator for the United Steelworkers, and since 1966 as the executive director of an outfit called the Major League Players Association, or as most sports fans have come to call it, the Players Union. What's that, you say? A baseball player has about as much in common with a working person as he does with the AWAC. Today's diamond hero is a greedy, overpaid, pampered prima donna who is living like a king and ruining the game. Well, in many instances, you are correct. Even Miller himself is envious of many of the contracts some of his rank and file possess. And Miller should know, in 1971, the median salary for a major leaguer was $31,543. Today it is more than $140,000, thanks largely to Miller's efforts. He negotiated the existing free agency plan, the crux of last season's crisis, and also swung that many authorities consider to be the best pension plan in America. With the help of federal arbitrators, he has transformed the stodgy baseball establishment, totally against its will, into the most liberal employer on the American sports scene. Miller kept a low profile during the executed negotiations, which broke down last year and caused the strike which truncated last year's Major League season. Now that another season is well underway and some of the issues temporarily resolved, Miller feels that some clarification of the issues is in order for what he calls the strangest labor negotiations I've ever been involved with. I suppose the most common mistaken idea the public had last year was that the players were threatening to strike for more money. Miller says that was not correct. The players were not demanding more money, nor were they demanding better working conditions, nor were they demanding more fringe benefits. The players did not want anything. The owners wanted to take back what the players already had. The key issue in last year's dispute involved the basic agreement each player signs with his team and the concept of free agency it contains, the issue of compensation for free agents who switch clubs as the bone of contention. The Players Association would not agree to any plan that would have damaged free agency, and the owners were insisting on a plan that reduced the free agents' bargaining power. The owners, they were not interested unless they could also damage the player, says Miller. That's what made this a problem. We were not opposed to a club which loses a real quality player getting something in return, but without damaging the free agent. Any proposal we made that did not damage the free agent was not good enough for them, the owners, to accept, and that was the crux of this problem. Miller is quick to point out that he agrees with those who say our society's sense of social and economic priorities is lopsided. If someone was to ask me, do you think a cancer researcher should be paid more than a ball player? I would say yes, but that is the way compensation is set in this society. What mystifies Miller as much as anything else is the allegiance of the media with the owners. In collective bargaining meetings, they, the owners, deny that they are losing money because if they claimed that they'd have to open up the books, then once outside the meetings, they collar the nearest media person and claim they are losing money. I think writers and therefore fans fail to make an appropriate distinction between worth and deserve. I think a lot of the fans and writers are saying they don't think that players so and so deserves this money. That's a subject of opinion, and that's okay. When they say this player was not worth this money, they don't know what they're talking about because that price was set by an owner who decided that at that point in time, that's exactly what that player was worth to him and not 1 cent more. The way this was being handled, you would imagine that Dave Winfield came into the Yankee Stadium with a bodyguard and a gun and a bomb and said, George Steinbrenner, Yankee owner, unless I get this salary, I will blow it up. We all know what Mr. Steinbrenner decided to pay was what Mr. Steinbrenner felt Dave Winfield was worth to his club at that point in time. Even the owner's attempts to portray him as a stubborn, power-hungry radical failed to ruffle the even-tempered Miller. One of the things I get most impatient with Marvin about, says his wife, is his infinite patience. He'll answer the same question over and over again. If someone has an incorrect notion, he'll slowly, painstakingly correct that notion. Me, I'd be irritated by the second call. Says one player who has been many negotiating sessions. I get so angry I'm about to go crazy, but there's Marvin, cool and calm and in control. Marvin has indicated that the recent dispute will, in all likelihood, be his last, a thought that must be making baseball's barons salivate in anticipation of the next crisis. But for the Brooklyn born Miller, a self described lifelong baseball fan, that is all the more reason to ensure the players a good deal. He wants to be able to look back at his job well done, says his wife. Marvin Miller thinks it is far too early for him to assess his impact on sports and, for that matter, on organized labor, especially when he has yet to see the results of a crucial dispute. There is never any glory in a strike, he says, but there are times when a strike is necessary. Unless unforeseen business surfaces, it seems a safe bet that Mrs. Miller's husband will at least get down to some serious television action during the summer of 1982. This is from the Daily Progress, Charlottesville, Virginia, February 12, 1983. Marvin Miller exits baseball scene with new tennis racket in hand, by Joseph Durso. New York. The first thing Marvin Miller did when he retired from baseball last month was to go out and buy a new tennis racket. The second thing he did was to head out for the office, where for 17 years he has been restructuring the major leagues as executive director of the Players Association. Any day now, he will get out the new racket and start batting balls around the court 3 days a week. But for the time being, he is still engrossed in completing the transaction of his office in stages to his successor, Ken Moffett, the former federal mediator. And By the spring, training opens next week. The transition will be entering phase two. Exit Miller as full-time boss. Enter Miller as full-time advisor and historian. Ken started on January 3rd, he said, the other day, but all through January I've been there every day. Now I'm digging out the files of 17 years, and I'm on call. I'm available as a consultant, but I'm leaving the organization in good shape. And I'm in good shape. It's an ideal time to leave. Good riddance, some club owners may feel after suffering a 17-year losing streak debating the issues with him, but don't think he plans to fade away like an old soldier. He may have that new tennis racket and the apartment on the east side of Manhattan where he lives with his wife Terry, a retired clinical psychologist, and he may finally have the chance to let somebody else do the arguing for 1,050 major league players. But there are still grievances to be heard and lawsuits to be tried, everything from television property rights to bubblegum cards, and he will be involved in those. Then, when things quiet down, maybe late in April, there is a book to be written. By then, he will be 66 years old, and he will be busy again, putting some English on the events he has shaped since the day in 1965 when a search committee found him in Pittsburgh, an economist helping to run the Steelworks Union. It's possible we're entering a period of truce, he said, referring to his battles with the 26 club owners since that day. It's time, I think, even the hardliners have had enough. Don't think Marvin Miller is losing the hop in his rhetoric either. Truce or not, he added, I'm not complacent about the future. The owners are concerned about salary levels, and I can understand that. But in the last month or so, they've attempted a new maneuver. We hear through the grapevine that 75% of the clubs voted that no club can have more than a 60-40 ratio of equity to debt. Think about that for a moment. They're saying that when you get to that point, you have no more money to pay salaries. They're again flirting with an antitrust law. In any other business, they'd go to jail for that. Club owners wince when they hear talk like that, but their wincing days aren't over. I'm still a member of the panel that reviews grievances under the basic agreement, he said, so I'll continue representing the players on all pending cases. Then we have a TV litigation case pending, a very important matter, property rights. I'm involved in grieving and taking depositions, and I'll be a witness when it gets to court, probably in the leading witness for the players. Then there's the bubblegum case. That's right, bubblegum. They sign up players in the major leagues for 5 years, but their contracts don't start until they reach the majors. The way they renew the contracts, they never run out. So the players decided that there was no point in having a reserve clause for bubblegum cards either. Putting aside the battles of the bubblegum cards, what was the most significant thing he remembers in the 17 years? No single incident, he said. The most important thing was the growing maturity of player leadership. It almost came through their reaction to a series of crises. In 1969, pensions, I recommended that they not sign contracts until the pension issue was settled. We had a list of 500 players, including every star, and all of them said they wouldn't sign until the pensions were settled. That was the first collective action. In 1972, pensions again, the controversial wisdom was that the players would not strike. If so, the strike would fold in 2 days. On March 31st, we had 48 player reps and alternatives fly to Dallas. I had no idea what they were going to do. They all spoke up at least once. Then they voted 47 to none with one abstention not to play. The next day, No exhibition games were played. They stayed out for 13 days. That was the first time they walked off. In 1976, it was the reserve clause. The owners thought the players would fold. They didn't. In 1981, the strike. The players stuck together that time too. That's it. The significant thing was joint action. It didn't happen overnight. It grew with success. So did their salaries. Since 1976, when the players won the right to become free agents, the average salary in the big leagues zoomed from 51,000 to 241,000. This year, the average on the California Angels is 422,000. On the Yankees, 411,000. How about the book? No villains, Marvin said. Some comparisons with basic industries and collective bargaining. Somewhat personalized, somewhat political. No heroes either, except for the players as a group. It sounds a little corny, I know. This is from the Philadelphia Inquirer, November 28th, 2012. Force Behind the Players by Richard Goldstein. Marvin Miller, economist and labor leader who became one of the most influential figures in baseball history by building the Major League Players Union into a force that revolutionized the game, died on Tuesday at his home in New York. He was 95. The death was announced by the Major League Baseball Players Association. When Miller was named executive director of that group in 1966, club owners ruled much that they had since the 19th century. The reserve clause in players' contracts bound them to their teams for as long as the owners wanted them, leaving them with little bargaining power. Come contract time, a player could expect an ultimatum, but not much more. The minimum salary was $6,000 and had barely budgeted for 2 decades. The average salary was $19,000. The pension plan was feeble, and player grievances could be heard only by the commissioner who worked for the owners. By the time Miller retired at the end of the 1982 season, he had forged one of the most strongest unions in America, creating a model for unions in basketball, football, and hockey. Never had the dugout been so professionalized. The average player salary had reached 241,000. The pension plan had become generous and players had won free agency and were hiring agents to issue their own demands. If they had a grievance, they could turn to an arbitrator. And Miller had taken his place among the most important figures in baseball. Peter Seitz, the impartial arbitrator who invalidated the reserve clause and created free agency in 1975, called him the Moses who had led baseball's children of Israel out of the land of bondage. Still, although his contributions to baseball were compared with those of Babe Ruth, who made the home run an essential part of the game, and Branch Rickey, who broke the Major League's color barrier when he signed Jackie Robinson to the Brooklyn Dodgers, Miller has not been recognized by the Baseball Hall of Fame. There's been concerted effort to downplay the union, Miller told the New York Times, referring to the Hall when he narrowly missed out on election in December 2010, the fifth time he had been on the ballot. It's been about trying to rewrite history rather than to record it. They decided a long time ago that they would downgrade any impact the union has had, and part of that plan was to keep me out of it. A silver-haired man with a mustache he had cultivated since he was 17, Miller, an economist by training, had bargained on behalf of the Steelworkers Union, but lacked the charisma of fiery old-style labor leaders like the mine workers John L. Lewis or the New York City transport workers Mike Quill. He was typically described as calm, patient, even-keeled. Nonetheless, he got results. Miller's goal was to get his ball players to think like steelworkers, to persuade members of the professional class to learn from members of the working class. Malcolm Gladwell wrote in the New Yorker in 2010, Everett M. Ehrlich, a business economist and an undersecretary of commerce in the Clinton administration, felt that Miller's victories owed much to the changing structure of the game. In particular, he pointed to baseball's expansion to the West Coast and the South, which led to enhanced television and attendance revenue that followed many ball clubs to spend heavily on players no longer tied to their teams. Hall of Fame Missing a Giant by Frank Fitzpatrick. The Baseball Hall of Fame's rejection of Marvin Miller, a snub that had owners' greedy fingerprints all over it, was petty at best, unconscionable at worst. By any measure, Miller, the founder and longtime executive director of the Players Association, was among the most significant figures in the game's history. Longtime Dodger broadcaster Red Barber once suggested that only Babe Ruth and Jackie Robinson had a greater impact. If baseball ever buys itself a mountain and starts carving faces on it, one of the first men to go up is sure to be Marvin Miller. Stats guru Bill James wrote in his introduction to Miller's book, A Whole Different Ballgame, for all its pretentious reverence, the Hall is home to scoundrels of every stripe, racists, drunks, misanthropes, wife-beaters, gamblers, syphilitics, and more than a few baseball resumes don't warrant their inclusion. Morgan Buckeley, whose career in the game spanned 2 years as a team owner and one as a National League president, is in the Hall. Miller is not. Bowie Keane, a bumbling commissioner who was KO'd by Miller every time since they shared the same ring, is in the Hall. Miller is not. Phil Rizzuto, who had 1,588 hits, 38 homers, and 563 RBI in a so-so 13-year career, is in the Hall. Miller is not. Holy cow. All Miller did was forever change the game, all of sports, really. Until he came along, baseball was a plantation. Players had no rights and no opportunity to change the status quo. He looked at baseball, stripped away its sentimental veneer, and saw it was for what it was, a money-making enterprise. He convinced the cowed players they had the same rights as any other American worker, and that included right to organize. It was Phillies Hall of Famer Robin Roberts who, with the aid of Penn professor George Taylor, found Miller and in 1966 gave the labor economist the job of molding the powerless players into a bargaining force. That was quite the challenge. Historically, the owners had ruthlessly crushed any organizing effort. The average major league salary in 1965 was $19,000. The minimum was $6,900 below what a typical American family earned that year. The reserve clause, as odious a judicial construct as the Dred Scott decision, bound them to one team for perpetuity. The nation's pastime was past time for a change. Eventually, with the aid of stars such as Robin Roberts and Jim Bunning, Miller persuaded the players of their worth through a decades-long series of negotiations, strikes, lockouts, and court actions. He transformed the 90-pound weakling Players Association into a sport's heaviest hitter. And what about all the whining and doomsaying that accompanied the union's rise? Well, all those teams that swore they'd be forced out of business if players had to be paid anything close to what they deserved are still around. Even the worst of them are worth hundreds of millions. Fans, many of whom took it on the chin economically precisely because they, too, had no clout, still carp about these players' salaries, yet continue to shell out big bucks for tickets and merchandise. Despite rapidly rising prices, almost 808 million fans have paid to watch Major League Baseball since 2000. The Veterans Committee that rejected Miller, by the way, was made up of Hall of Fame manager Whitey Herzog, Hall of Fame players Johnny Bench, Eddie Murray, Jim Palmer, Tony Perez, Frank Robinson, Ryan Sandberg, and Ozzie Smith. White Sox owner Jerry Reinsdorf, Orioles president Andy MacPhail, former Phillies president Bill Giles, Royals owner David Glass, and writers Bob Elliott, Tim Kirkjian, Tom Verducci, and Ross Newen. If you have to believe all the management representatives snubbed Miller, Reinsdorf, after all, headed the coup that ousted independent commissioner Fay Vincent and replaced him with fellow owner Bud Selig. His apathy for Miller is well known. As for the 7 players, all of whom were enriched by Miller's efforts, I can't imagine any would vote no, and I'm equally sure those 4 top-shelf writers fully understood the man's contributions, but only 11 of the 16 voted for him, one shy of the necessary 12. If you assume the 4 management representatives rejected Miller, that still means either Herzog or one of the players or writers joined them. So Bowie Keene, Sergeant Garcia to Miller's Zorro, made it to Cooperstown before Miller. That's not exactly a mistake, it's an embarrassment. There's a lot here on Mr. Marvin Miller, and again, I do kind of plan on writing a book on him in probably 2027 or so. I'm kind of booked this year with stuff. As you guys can see, he's really, really important to baseball history, and whether what he did was good for the game or not for the game, that's for you guys to judge. Yeah, he created free agency as we know it today. I was trying to think about that. Did he really create free agency? Yes, in fact, I think he kind of did with the Andy Messerschmidt case. And uh, those articles were actually really interesting. There's lots of stuff there that I wasn't aware of. And Marvin Miller did get in the Hall of Fame eventually. I think it was after his passing that he got in, so he didn't get to enjoy that, and we didn't get to hear his speech. So that's on that's on Cooperstown once again, and I would say that Canton is actually worse than Cooperstown when it comes to getting players in the Hall of Fame. And for the record, I don't like the fact that they have elderly players on the ballot for the first time. And I'm talking about Canton specifically, but baseball is just as bad, um, particularly because like you could probably make an argument like, well, if these guys were good enough to be in the Hall of Fame, they would have been there already, and they're not. And so, like, I'm not entirely convinced of that argument, but some people make that. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna leave it here. I've been rambling on for way too long now, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section below. And have a good one. Bye.